Good evening. My name is Melissa Carlson with the League of Women Voters of Johnson County. Welcome to Let's Talk Issues, a public service project of the League of Women Voters and Johnson County Community College. Here to introduce our panel, and tonight's topic is retired school superintendent of the Olathe Public Schools, Dr. Pat All. Pat?
Thank you. Thank you for having us here tonight and for the opportunity to talk about an important topic, education. It's something I think that's highly valued in this particular part of the state, as well as across the state of Kansas, and is often discussed in the media. And we have a great group of panelists with us tonight. Our first panelist is Dr. Marlon Berry. He's superintendent of the Olathe Public Schools. Next to Marlon is Dr. Blake West. He's president of the Kansas National Education Association. Over here to the right is Miss Sue Storm, and she's a member of our State Board of Education. And next to Sue is Dr. Johnson, Gene Johnson, and he's superintendent of the Shawnee Mission Public Schools. And to my immediate right is Mr. David Smith, and he's the chief of staff for the Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools. So I believe we're going to have some great perspectives tonight for our Let's Talk issues about the challenges facing education, but perhaps some of our successes and opportunities. And I'd like to just start a little bit on our successes because Johnson County in this area was built on quality public schools. Gene, just talking from the Shawnee Mission point of view, what do you see as some of the successes happening in public school education?
Well, from our perspective in Shawnee Mission, our goal is to make sure that when our students walk across the stage at graduation that they're ready for the next step in their life. And so that's what we're all about, and I know everybody else here with the panel has got that same goal. So, we've over the last many years have put together programs that will allow students to get some really good training and opportunities so that when they take that next step, they have a pretty good idea what they're getting into. So we've got opportunities for our high school students in the areas of pre-engineering, Center for International Studies, biotechnology, pre-law, pre-medical, biomedical health sciences. We have College Now opportunities for students, culinary arts opportunities, plus some very high-level opportunities such as International Baccalaureate. And we started that program about 18 or 19 years ago in one school, and we moved it to 2 schools a couple of years ago, and next year we'll go to our 3rd school. So that's big for us. And last year we had 267 of our students in the district that were named as advanced placement scholars in the state, which was great for us. And we've had high schools named as best high schools in Newsweek and Washington Post. But again, the goal is we want our students to come back and tell us, you did a great job with us, and we're making it at the next level, whatever that might be, college, workforce, whatever a student might choose.
Shawnee Mission's been the largest school district in the county for a long time, and it's had a rich tradition of excellence. And I'll turn to Dr. Berry, Olathe growing school district, now the largest school district in Johnson County, and I believe in the metro area. And you want to just highlight a few successes that we're seeing in public school education in Olathe?
Sure, thanks, Pat. We're proud of a lot of programs in Olathe, but one that I want to focus on just for a moment. Across the country, as well as in the state of Kansas, obviously, there's a lot of talk about narrowing the achievement gap. And that's not only a gap from top to bottom, but sometimes there needs to be a focus in the middle. And so Olathe has had a long-time program, the AVID program, A-V-I-D, Advancement via Individual Determination. It's a national research-based program that really targets kids in the middle and tries to provide the extra structure and support and skills so that they can have access and success in college. And so again, it's a wonderful program that we have, and other districts I know have it as well. But just a couple quick stories with first names only. Daniel came to our school district 4 years ago, could not speak English, enrolled purely in ELL programs, And through the AVID program, he gets into advanced placement courses, did extremely well academically, and is now on scholarship playing soccer here at Johnson County Community College and doing well academically. Another young lady, a very average student getting C's, got clicked in with the AVID program, enrolled in advanced placement classes, now getting A's, and the teacher says the girl's working her tail off, literally, in terms of it's just a connection that kids have, the support structure. In many cases, these are the first kids in their family that have gone to college, but we have success story after success story of kids that are in college now, writing back saying, I'm still using the skills that I learned in that program. But it's really a refreshing sight to see those kids that are in the middle that maybe wouldn't have gone to college, and they get hooked into the AVID program and really take off.
Okay. And David from Kansas City, Kansas, I know that you've got some successful projects going on there, and you want to share something specific with us today?
Sure, I'd love to, but I always want to start with our history and where we've come from, because we, 15 years ago when we began our First Things First reform effort, we were a district that was really struggling academically. We only had 11% of our students proficient in reading and 3% in math. We have done, since that time, one reform effort. We've been doing the same thing in all of our buildings, and we've gone from 11% proficiency in reading to 68%, and in math from 3% to 67%. So across the system, we've raised the achievement of our students. We've done it by focusing on building relationships with our students and their families, and also focusing on changing instruction. We're now at the point where we see ourselves moving from being a good urban district, and those kind of results are hard to find anywhere, to moving into being a good district and an excellent district. We're doing things like we've given every one of our high school students a laptop computer, a MacBook, because we know that our students are going to need to be able to be productive in whatever comes next for them, and computers are going to be a part of their world. Many of our students, because we have 87% of our students eligible for a free or reduced lunch, don't have access to those things at home. So as a school district, we feel the responsibility to provide those things and make sure that our kids can use them to be productive.
Okay, that's great. Sue, you're a state board member, and your job is to really look out for the entire state of Kansas, and you may have some perspectives here on...
I'm just so excited to hear what everybody's doing, but I want to tell you that this kind of thing is happening all over the state. There's good education, good instruction going on everywhere, and that AVID program is being used in a lot of places, and I'd certainly like to know more about it. I'd like to talk just a minute about state assessments and what we're doing. Just one little piece of data that just surprises me. There are 5 levels of competency on the state assessments, and the top 2 are exceeds standards, and then exemplary. In both reading and math, the highest percentage of students are at the exemplary level. There's more kids in the exemplary level than in academic warning, approaches standards, meet standards, or exceed standards. That's just amazing to me, because we worry so much about those schools or districts that didn't make AYP, when 32% of our students are exemplary. That's even better than exceed standards in reading, and 30% in math. That's just amazing. We have put in place a Kansas Learning Network. We contract with an outside agency, but there are state people who are working on the teams. And it's our plan to assist schools that are on improvement, which means they haven't made the annual yearly progress for 2 or 3 years running. I want to give you an example. In Liberal, very transient population, 73% Latino. In one of their schools, they don't have enough Caucasians to make it a subgroup. Isn't that interesting? They've been on improvement for 6 years, and then the last 2 or 3 they've been working with the Learning Network. Comparing their scores from 2008 to 2011, they've increased their scores in reading from 66 to 82% proficiency, and 62 to 77% in math. And those ELL students, a large part of that 73%, their scores have gone from 56 to 75% proficiency in reading, and 57 to 73% in math. So many school districts have just really taken hold of things and are really working to improve students. Another thing that's happening, Jean mentioned our signature programs, but that's happening all over the state with schools stepping up to be sure that students are college and career ready when they graduate. I mean, Blue Valley has a great program, and McPherson's making some moves, and Kansas City, Kansas. And when the budget crisis that we're in, that's exciting to see that we're moving ahead with what needs to be done.
That's great. You know, Blake, you represent a lot of teachers in the state of Kansas. What's the role of teacher in a successful education for a student?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, because when you ask about successes, I can just hear my colleagues around the state, and the stories that they would tell would be those individual success stories. Sometimes the story of a student who maybe was kept in school that was thinking of dropping out. And there's also those great success stories of the student. I had a young man who, as a sophomore in college, contacted me that he had written some software. And I'm a computer science teacher, and he was paid $2 million for that. And I'm thinking, maybe I chose the wrong career. But actually, teachers across the state believe they did choose the right career to make a difference. And right now, what we see across the state are, even in these difficult economic times, teachers that are so committed to increasing their own professional development, to ensure that they're integrating 21st century skills, so that we're not just doing well on the state assessments, but we're making sure that the students feel ready, as you say, for the next phase of life. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that many teachers just got word this past week that they've successfully completed their national board certification. One of those individuals that I know personally just renewed her national board certification, and that's the vice president of Kansas NEA, Karen Godfrey. She returned to her classroom to do that work, even though she's on release time to help do professional development for teachers all across the state.
And we've seen over the years, particularly in the last 10, a lot of change in the needs of young people in our state, changes in children coming who might not have English as their primary language, increase in poverty, children that may not have the support systems, and we also have a more mobile society where children are not just staying from kindergarten to grade 12 in one district with that inherent continuity that's built in. And so I think, as I heard today, we're seeing a lot more of intentional instructional strategies that are research-based, that are data-driven, and are showing results. And I heard you talk about the successes that you have in trying to prepare kids for the next step. The workforce has some challenges right now, and there's been some discussion that some of our workforce is not prepared for the 21st century skills. And you cited some programs. Are there any partnerships out there that we have going with business, industry, and others, or higher ed, that the public and our audience might not be aware of, that our students get access to, or help make that a smooth transition? I'll take a volunteer.
We can talk about what we're doing in Kansas City, Kansas. We believe that every one of our students needs to graduate with both some kind of internship experience, but also with college credit. And we work with the Kansas City, Kansas Community College and with Donnelly College. Some of our students, starting as sophomores, begin taking college-level courses. For our students, many of whom are going to be first-generation college goers, we think they need that experience of actually being successful in a college class before they get ready to leave us. So we've got those partnerships. We work with companies like Cerner to do some internships. We have kids, and what I love about Cerner is they do real work. They actually get to be part of a project team. They work on a real project. When they're done, they can point to that solution and say, I did that. That's part of who I am. So we do a lot of work with business and with our higher education institutions.
Good.
I think you're right, Pat. It takes partnerships today, I think, to meet all the challenges that we have in trying to give kids a really relevant education. And in Olathe, we're so pleased that we do have a number of partners. One of the most recent would be in our 21st Century Skills program. We have teamed with K-State Olathe. And it is part, as you know, in southern Johnson County, or in Johnson County, we're part of that animal health corridor. And so a lot's happening there. And so we have a new program that's animal health, that our kids get the chance to go in and be involved with research and work alongside of vets and learn how to be a tech and those kinds of things, which is really interesting to kids. But it gives them that little peek at an area of science to know whether they really want to go that way when they get to college. A second one that I heard about again just today, another story from it, is with our Olathe Medical Center campus and our Bridging Education and Medicine program. We have kids in the sports medicine program, and they're actually getting to shadow doctors at the hospital 8 to 10 hours a week, including being in surgery. They get to stand right next to a surgeon, and this young man in sports medicine has gotten to see a complete knee replacement and an arthroscopic surgery and on and on. So the experiences that kids are getting really makes them get turned on for some of that learning and sparks them on for later learning.
I think also that the partners that we have for our students are very amazed at how well our students are doing, what they can do. It's really, that's what we hear from our partners is, like in our biomedic or biotech program, students are, working with DNA, and they're getting all these tremendous experiences in medical and other areas too. But I think that all of us have tried to identify programs for our students that we know that those industries are big here in Kansas City, just like culinary arts. I mean, restaurants are big time in Kansas City, and they need people that know what they're doing and can be creative. And it's amazing what students can do when you just give them a little, let that leash out a little bit.
One of the statewide partnerships that I think people might really be interested in is looking at the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. And just looking at p21.org on the internet will lead to some information. There's probably 25 of some of the leading high-tech businesses in the country that initially formed that partnership. And Kansas has been a real leader nationally as a participant in that partnership. They emphasize that not only is it important that students have some experiences seeing what careers might hold for them, but to realize that you can't prepare anyone for a career in high school, because by the time they finish their post-high school work, whether that's a technology school or a four-year college, those careers are going to have changed. And so the most important things that employers are telling us about is that students need to master the 4 C's. Critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication skills. And those things need to be integrated throughout all of our curriculum. Project-based learning is one way to get to that, and the projects that tie into the real world in our communities are an excellent way to make that happen.
Just kind of go to the elephant in the room. There have been a lot of budget cuts that have happened across the state of Kansas as well as across the country, and obviously education, because it is a major part of the state budget, has had those cuts. I think we're into our 3rd year of continuous cutting into budgets. Let's talk a little bit about what have you seen in cuts in your school districts? And I'll go with the local districts here. Dr. Berry, what have you seen in the last several years in terms of just dollars and cents cuts? Let's start with that first.
I think we've avoided totaling it up now when we're going multiple years, but it's been more than $20 million that we've cut from the Olathe budgets. And that has to be impacted in personnel, unfortunately. We've tried to maintain as many programs as we could, but when the large part of our budget is salaries, and you get cut that severely, it has to impact personnel. So we say it all the time, we have fewer people teaching more kids in our case because we have an increased enrollment. So that's been the real challenge for us.
Do you have a sort of a number to pull out of the number of additional students Olathe has in the last 3 years?
It'll be an extra 1,000 students probably that we've grown at least.
Yeah. And that would be probably, that growth would be larger than probably a lot of school districts.
That's correct.
Probably in Kansas. Okay.
And it's all proportional. Across Kansas, school districts everywhere are having to trim, and it's just as difficult, I'm sure. But when you're a growing school district in Johnson County, it makes it even that much harder.
Yeah. And so, you know, that's sort of the Olathe story of growth, and I know Shawnee Mission Stories just has a little different twist to it. You want to share that, Dr. Johnson?
Well, you know, Shawnee Mission is a long-standing school district that unified in 1969. And in 1970, we had almost 46,000 students. 10 years later, we lost 1,000 students a year in 10 years. And so since that time, we've been just slowly declining. And that's just the nature of our population. People like the community. Their children graduated from high school and they stayed. And so, but we are now kind of flattening out. We're going to be at about 27,000 for the next 8 or 9 years, we're predicting. And so this year, through our own audit, and of course there'll be a state audit of our enrollment, but you know, we're going to lose about 50 students. And so last year I think we gained about 25, somewhere in there. So we're pretty flat at this time. But as far as our reductions, we're just like, you know, Olathe. We're about $29 million in the last 3 years on reductions, less teachers, less classified personnel. Just as an example, we've cut back our custodial staff so much that our classrooms are cleaned every 3 days now. Now our restrooms and major areas are cleaned every day naturally, but you know, our students are doing a great job with that. Our teachers are doing a great job with that and making accommodations within their school to make sure that everything's fine there. But you know, that's just an example of some very severe reductions that we've all gone through. And you know, Marlon's correct. You know, all of us are spending 85 to 89% of our budgets on personnel. So when you cut that much out of your budget, it's people.
Yeah, and I think that we're a people business. What about KCK? What has been the impact there for you?
Well, we've been through the same struggles as our other districts in the area. We, over the past 6 years, are down $63 million. So it's a tremendous hit, and like Dr. Berry and Dr. Johnson, it's about people. That's where you have to go. But also, like them, I'm sure you work very hard to try to keep that from the classroom as much as you possibly can. So you end up cutting other things probably more than would be warranted just to try to avoid impacting kids directly. So operations and those kind of things always seem to suffer. Central office, the support staff that help schools to do their work well have been cut severely. It's been hard, and the other part of that is, as Sue, you understand, is that the standards continue to increase, and as a state and as districts, we've all continued to move forward even with less funding. But it's been a real struggle, and at some point you wonder whether we can keep going.
And I think that's kind of a interesting topic, because the funding has been reduced, but so far the performance, at least on the measures that we've used, seem to be holding. What's your worry about that? I mean, why is that happening? Anyone want to jump in?
You know, I know all of us, because of why we're in this business, we are determined not to let the actions of others impact the futures of our kids. So we're going to do whatever we have to, take whatever kinds of pain we have to. The challenge becomes, at some point, you're done with the cutting of fat, and I think for all of us, that's been probably a year or two ago, where we finished cutting any possible fat that we had. So now you're cutting into things that really matter. You're also cutting into the kinds of things you want to develop to get you positioned for the future and for the kids who are coming through. And that kind of future planning, after a while, if you cut that, then when the future comes, you're not ready for it.
So do we have some deferred maintenance? Do we have deferred opportunities? Is that
deferred purchases? There's a long list of things that we are doing without, as David said, just so we can focus and keep it going in the classroom as much as we can.
I think David brought up a really good point on planning for the future, and I think in the situation that we're in right now, it's harder for us to plan for the future, and because that's the nature of what we do in education. We're always looking ahead. What can we do better? And even though we can still have those conversations and plan, it's been very hard for us to initiate new programs, to do some of the things that we would normally be able to do. And one other point I think is important here when it comes to the ongoing success in spite of some real financial challenges has been, I think we've received some very excellent support from the State Department in areas such as multi-tier systems of support, where we've really learned how to analyze data, analyze students. The stories that Sue told about liberal and that David told about his school district going from 3% to 67%, that doesn't just happen. People have to work very smart, very hard, and I really believe that people have, you know, they've stuck with the course. They haven't fallen off or just tried to grab some new strategy and try and find something else that might work. We've stayed with it, and I think it's been beneficial to us, but it's resulted in a tremendous amount of effort by fewer people.
The other thing I'd like to add, and I know Blake will want to jump in here, is that with these cuts that we've seen, we haven't been able to give, particularly our teaching staff, but all of our staff, the kinds of raises and increases that we should be giving them. And we need to be able to attract the best and the brightest into this profession. And it gets harder and harder as the salary stagnates. And I know that's something that you see across the state.
Well, I could certainly add to that, and I would be, again, remiss if I didn't. There are some colleagues around the state that would want me to make sure and mention that. But I also think that most teachers believe that the impact, excuse me, even on things that are supposedly not a classroom impact, those in many cases are having a profound impact on the work of teachers and of students. And around the state, I've heard stories about a district that reduced the number of buses and bus drivers, so they lengthened the bus routes. So students, particularly in a rural district, were on the bus instead of 20 minutes in the morning, they were on the bus for 45 minutes in the morning. Some places where they've cut art and music programs. More frequently, places where they have reduced access to library media staff. Sometimes eliminating all the library media personnel in the district that had the training to help students with those 21st century skills for research that we talked about. The class size. If we're trying to get to 21st century skills kinds of projects in our class, and the number of students is increasing, then we go back to probably more simplistic teaching methods that are going to get the broadest reach to all of our students, but miss those opportunities for those individualized connections that really make a difference for individual students. So I think some of the cuts that are there, they are the most well-intentioned, but they do have an impact even in the classrooms.
And Sue, I want to give everybody a chance to speak on this part before we...
I could just repeat the same thing that Blake is talking about, and David and Jean, Marlon.
And so when we're talking about, you know, what we're facing right now, you know, recently the governor did propose a new funding plan for the state, and I recognize that there's not a lot of detail yet for that plan, but let's talk a little bit about what we think we know about that plan, because it seems to be a departure from the formula that's being used now and has been used since the early 90s. And I don't know if anybody wants to step out on this one first, but Dr. Berry, you want to take an effort at this?
You know, I can't speak for all school superintendents and administrators in Kansas, but many times we take our cues from Dale Dennis at the State Department, and one of the first things he has said is he's not going to comment on it because we haven't seen anything. So that's number one. I'm trying to be very optimistic that maybe when we take a look at it and a run is made, a computer run to see how school districts come out, then we'll be able to react to it a little bit more. We keep hearing that it is revenue neutral, which means school districts will be held harmless and so forth. But it looks like in some of the pieces that we've heard a little bit about, it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to not have cuts happen to school districts depending on how that money is going to be given out. It's my understanding maybe the weightings would go away, but the money would be given to school districts in what they're calling block grants. So there would be one for at-risk, there would be one for operating, which would include transportation and so forth. There's one for innovation, which again tells me if it's being split differently and it's the same pool of money, it's somebody's bound to end up being a loser and others maybe staying neutral in it. So again, for me right now, too many moving pieces to know exactly how our school district might come out.
What are you
From our
hearing,
point
Jim?
of view, we would support just the concept of looking at another type of funding formula. And I think right now I would totally agree with Marlon that, you know, we don't know what the details are, but we are, from our perspective in our school district, we're excited about the opportunity to at least look at something different. And once we get the details, then we'll be able to better weigh in on how that's affecting everyone. Because right now, I think everybody's trying to kind of figure out what this really truly means, and so and there really isn't any data. But for us, and for we are very much in favor of having more local authority, so that we have the opportunity to control our own destiny, but also realizing that, you know, we have to know our community and know how our community can react or will react or may react to increasing mill levies, because that could be, you know, an issue. But again, it's an opportunity to look at something that many school districts have been wanting to look at, and that is more local authority.
Does local authority translate into local control? I mean, we hear these terms thrown around of local control and more local authority. Are we talking about a shifting of taxes from one source at the state, maybe through income, to more property taxes at the local level? I mean, do we have some specifics that we could even identify for our audience?
Well, local authority, I guess one way to look at it is that you're able to raise money locally that stays in your school district and doesn't go to the state and come back at a fraction of what you sent away. And so just as an example, you know, we've been dealing with the local option budget since almost the very beginning of the finance formula in 1992. And in our situation, in many school districts in the state of Kansas, without that local authority that's now up to 31% of your general operating budget, you know, it would have been almost impossible for us to, you know, operate our school district in the way that we feel it's important for our students. To us, the local authority equals almost $55 million a year.
Pat, I think you're right there. There's going to be a shifting potentially of those sources of taxes. And, you know, we used to say in Kansas a long time ago it was a three-legged stool, that there was income and property and sales tax, and I'm afraid we've gotten away from that. And now, particularly with some talk about maybe reducing or eliminating income tax in Kansas, and then you shift that to say, okay, schools, but you can have more local control, and the lid is lifted on LOB. The only card we have to play is property tax. So that's a little concern I have, that how much that might have to go up to compensate for that. Additionally, this equalization piece, it's my understanding, the limited things that are out there, that the local control then would not be equalized. And even in Olathe, that's critical to us, because we get about 37 cents on the dollar from the state on LOB dollars.
So in Olathe, there's actually more state aid that comes in than
total budget.
Total.
That's exactly right. We get more from Topeka in the bottom line than we raise locally in taxes.
And I think some people may or may not be aware that there's that difference even within the county in terms of county school districts, and statewide, you know, just as there's differences here, and that's been the challenge in the state. So you see the statewide differences. Yes. What are some of the differences across the state, and can you speak at all to the tax base or to the needs?
I would like to give a response to the governor's plan.
Okay.
That Marlon's right. We haven't seen anything on paper. The young man from the governor's office who told us about it at a recent education summit in Topeka, when asked about the cost of it, he said, I haven't figured that out in my head yet. So we haven't seen a run of anything. So I understand, Gene, you know, that local option control, that local option authority has always been appealing to some of the districts in Johnson County. But we have to be very careful that we don't end up with the same kinds of inequities that changed things all around in 1992. And that LOB was meant for enhancements, and we've used it for survival because the state didn't keep its promise about supporting schools.
I think that really, for us, really is the issue. I don't think that in KCK we really believe the funding formula is broken as much as we believe that the state has not fulfilled its obligation to fund education adequately. If the funding formula had been funded over the past several years, we would all be in a very different position right now. For us, because Wyandotte County is the poorest county in the state, the idea of putting more on local taxpayers really is problematic. Our LOB is already significantly above the median for the rest of the state, but yet it brings in far less because compared to my colleagues in Shawnee Mission, we bring in about a third of the resources with our LOB. So we also, and I would say for our kids, 87% of whom are eligible for a free and reduced lunch, for them, the resources that come in to support their education probably make more of a difference in terms of their educational outcomes than for other kids in the state, because what we're able to give them is what they have. If we, for example, didn't do our one-to-one laptop program, most of those students wouldn't have access to technology in the home. So it really makes a huge difference in terms of their educational outcomes. We've got to figure out a way in the state of Kansas to figure out how to fund education adequately for all districts so that Shawnee Mission can do the things it wants to do and KCK can do the things that it needs to do for its kids as well. That's the challenge.
Blake, you might want to jump in here too.
I may just give one contrast. As a teacher in the Blue Valley School District, I feel very blessed to have had the resources, the technology for the computer classes and things. As I became a state leader, though, and began to travel around, I realized that, for instance, in Galena, Kansas, it requires 6 times as much of a tax rate to raise the same amount per pupil as it does in, say, Shawnee Mission, where I live, and recognize how difficult that is for many school districts around the state to make those kinds of adjustments. If we had simply maintained inflationary increases on the base state aid from 1992 when the formula was created, there would be a tremendous amount of additional authority that school districts all around this area could be using for the kinds of projects that they desperately want to do and that we'd very much like to see available to our classrooms. I guess the additional thing that concerns me, and we don't have all the numbers right now, the additional concern would be when we look at the tax structure. We've heard talk about eliminating the income tax. There's a part of me that says, boy, that sounds like a great idea. And yet I know when I've looked at the states where that has happened that are being touted as examples of how well it works, the only places where it has worked well are states where they have high systems of tourism. And so if we can put in some beaches like Florida, it might be something that would fly here. But for us, I think we're going to have to look at maintaining that three-legged stool with the balance of tax from various sources and make sure that every district has the baseline that they need to ensure a quality public school in every community, regardless of the zip code of the student.
You know, the state of Kansas is challenged by geography in terms of many of the districts out west, great distances, very few students. So sometimes on a per pupil basis, it costs more to educate that child in western Kansas than it would in a more urbanized area as in Johnson County, simply because of the challenges. Are any of you optimistic that a solution, we've been talking about the funding formula in Kansas prior to 1992, since 1992, you know, does anyone have an idea about what might, other than putting in more money, which may or may not be palatable right now, just given the economy, because there might be people in our audience saying, well, right now may not be the time and we may not be able to put more money. Is there a plan or an idea out there that you think would help?
Well, maybe there's a possibility that until we get through these financial issues and until we come together on a specific plan, maybe there's some options out there that could be tentative or year to year or something to help districts get through the issues that they're dealing with. And I'm not sure exactly what those are. but I think there may be numerous opportunities out there, but all of that has to be approved through the legislature, and that's been, lots of things have been discussed over the years, like you've said, but when it comes to, okay, what's going to happen here, it's been very difficult for change to occur.
I was going to say that one of the things my superintendent says to us all the time is, we have money. It's not that we're not spending money, we are. It's that we've faced significant cuts, but we also have to make good choices with the resources that we do have. And that means not doing certain things so that we can do the things that we need to do. Now, we believe, and I think my colleagues would agree, education ought to be the #1 priority for the state of Kansas. That's in its constitution, and that's where we ought to be thinking first. It usually ends up being the last thing that the state decides to fund. It ought to be the first, and that's a legislative choice that I think we need to push our legislators to think about. Fund education first. It's the right thing to do for our students, but also for the future of our state.
Well, we have, local boards of education that make a lot of local decisions. We have a state board of education that helps set standards and works to support, but you don't have the power of the purse because the state board does not levy taxes, and school districts are tied to a state formula, and the majority of the dollars that support schools in Kansas, for the audience's understanding, come through the state to the individual school districts. So what happens in terms of funding may not totally be under the control of their local board of education and may not fully be under control of the state board. The state board can make recommendations, the local boards can give that input. What will the process, do you think, as you're looking in your crystal balls, look like on the governor's plan going forward? What's the timeline here if any of our audience members want to sort of keep tuned in for more of these details as they get discussed and more of the data surfaces? Sue?
Well, I would say whatever plan is put forth by the governor, by the time it's finished, it won't look like it did when it started. It will be changed tremendously. And I suppose, and I hesitate to say this, but we'll see where a lot of legislators' loyalties really lie when it comes to their support or lack of support for a new finance plan. If anything's going to get done in the next session, people need to have it in front of them now. Would be my take on it.
And just for clarification, again for the audience, when does the next legislative session start?
About January the 10th.
January the 10th. And
right,
so
and for early
between January and the end of May.
Yes.
Sometimes moving into June, but it's typically the time that all these decisions are made by the legislature. Okay? Blake, you were going to say something.
I just long for the day when the legislature went to Topeka, and maybe I'm daring to dream that this ever happened, without coming strictly with a group of positions into the room. And I'm remembering some people that I always thought of as real statesmen, people like Mark Parkinson. He was a Republican and then he was a Democrat, and part of the reason that he made those changes was his real deep desire to solve problems and to get past party lines. I remember David Adkins as another senator from the Johnson County area. This is a time when we need statesmanship and people who will come without position, and frankly people that will bring the right players into the room, people like the superintendents from the school districts, and to hear the stories of individual teachers and their classroom needs. And so far, that's a part of the equation that has been largely left out of the design. We can hope for the best, but I really would hope, along with Sue, that it does change, that along the way we'll have an opportunity for input from the interested parties, those that know what it's like to do the work in schools and school districts.
I've always been sensitive to the fact that there's a segment of our population that thinks education always has, we always have our hand out, for more money, and people that say you can't throw money at a problem like this. But in my opinion, our school districts and our educators, our teachers, we know how to educate kids. We know the best practices, and we really can roll up our sleeves and go after it, but you have to have adequate resources. And in fact, I keep hearkening back to, I believe it was in 2006, it was a study that the legislature commissioned through post-audit to do a study of the resources it takes. And I believe it came out that it was almost a one-to-one correlation between the amount of resources you spend and the level of achievement, the learning that takes place. And so again, we know what to do, and we're scrimping and cutting back, and it's starting to crack right now, but it's got to take adequate resources to prepare our kids.
Do you see with the funding changes or some of the discussions going on, and obviously with the past cuts, are we seeing I'm almost hearing a little bit of the narrowing of the curriculum, the narrowing of the opportunities, assessments drive accreditation, so is that the core focus that we have to keep because of accreditation, and the things like field trips and hands-on experience, project-based learning are the ones that get chipped away at?
You've probably hit the nail on the head for the thing that's the greatest stressor among teachers in the classroom right now, is the fact that in some cases we are focusing almost completely on trying to make sure that students are mastering those basic skills in larger and larger classes, and losing the opportunity to achieve those goals with project-based learning and to achieve those goals with the 21st century skills. I've been in a faculty meeting where the teachers were almost in tears. Their students were doing very well on the state assessments, and yet they knew that they were not able to give their best. They were not able to allow students to have the greatest opportunities because they were simply trying to make sure that they met that next level for the accreditation.
Because the bar goes up every year under
up.
the No Child Left Behind.
Right.
So it's not just a matter of progress for that individual student. Everybody.
And we want a growth-based model, and we want to be able to look at individual student progress as opposed to every student having to meet some arbitrary benchmark on a particular day on one test.
And what Blake is talking about for us is why we changed our target. Rather than, because we had students who were proficient on the state exam, but yet didn't have the skills to go into regular classes when they got to college, we decided we needed a target that would say, if you have at least a 21 on the ACT, and that is our target, then studies say that you're going to be successful when you get to college, and you'll be able to persist to graduation. So even though that makes it harder on us as the adults, it's the right thing for us to do for our kids. Our kids need to have the skills so that they can be successful either in college, if they go straight to college, or in whatever career that they choose. But that means that you have to keep the curriculum broad. And one of the things I know that we're all challenged with is none of us got into this work to narrow the curriculum. We got into it because we believed in a full education, which includes the arts, physical activity, science, technology, all of those things. And we all are working hard to maintain that broader curriculum. So it's not just reading, math, and narrow skills. Because part of it is the world that our kids are going into. The particular skills they learn will probably be out of date by the time they get there, but their ability to work together, their ability to collaborate, their ability to learn, that's what they're going to carry with them. And that's what a broad educational curriculum gives to our kids.
May I tell the story of Greg House?
Yes, you may.
He was a colleague of mine at Blue Valley North High School for many years, and this past year cancer took his life. He had returned to teaching even after retirement because he just loved the classroom. And at the memorial service that they recently held for him, must have been 1,000 students, former students of his, in that room. They put a rocking chair on the stage of the hall. It was the rocking chair from his classroom where, when he went there to teach, the students knew he was going to be talking about something that was a much more important lesson in life. And those lessons helped him to reach students, keep some students in school. He reached out and coached. He won, I believe, 20 state swimming titles. His teams did in 27 years. This was a man that had a tremendous impact, but what students remembered him for was the fact that he taught more than the curriculum. He taught the individual students.
Sue?
And just a comment, we all are teaching more than the curriculum, and sometimes that's really, really good, and sometimes it's, isn't so helpful. Because just by who we are, we're teaching more than the curriculum. The state board is looking at, and it'll be a long time coming, a new accreditation system than QPA, because we know a good education takes more than reading and math skills. It's 21st century skills, it's creative thinking, it's critical thinking, it's character, so many more things. And all of these people will have input into a new system. But we have been so driven by reading and math that some really terrible things happened when we first began. We did things that we knew were not developmentally correct. There were schools that were not having recess, which I'm sure that increased the behavior problems in the rest of the day. But that isn't helpful, and we should not put people in the position that they feel like that's what they have to do. Some elementary schools are kind of slacking off on science, and that certainly isn't helpful, because we know what the future holds. But I think that we've moved past that some, but I hope that a new accreditation system and a new authorization of ESEA, if it happens, will take a more realistic view of what education is supposed to be.
And for the public, ESEA would be what we refer to as
No Child
Left Behind.
It's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act.
And so we're just sort of in a waiting mode to see what's going to happen at that level, and then states are going to respond to that, and then local districts will have to respond to that.
I do want to add, because we talk about all this testing, but No Child Left Behind has not been totally irrelevant. It has been very important. We have addressed students' needs that we used to just think they couldn't be reached. You know, well, he doesn't come to school all the time, and he acts just like his brother did, all those things. But we're focusing on all of the children, and that we are, you know, the parents don't keep their best ones at home. They send us what they've got. And No Child Left Behind has helped us in that sense. And so I would not ever say, I wish we'd never done it.
I think there's some, you know, I would agree with Sue. There's been a lot of positives that have come from No Child Left Behind, but we're at a situation now where schools can be labeled as failing when they're actually improving, and I think that's really a shame, because it's not, because I know how hard people work, and if we had a growth model connected with this, I think it would be so much better. Because it puts where we are now puts a tremendous amount of pressure that I think is undue to a lot of people, and I think that's really unfair. And you know, it's just when you run into situations where schools are doing very well, they may even be awarded a standard of excellence, but still not make AYP. I mean, that just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Can you simply explain that to the public that might be watching, how that could happen?
Well, I'm not sure that I can totally explain that. I'm serious about that. You know, it's a very complicated system, but when people work really hard and get better at what they do, systematically, being labeled failing is very difficult to understand for the public and for the teachers who are working so hard.
And sometimes it can be one group of students that are in a category
Right.
that didn't quite make the standard, and then the entire school then would have that label. The benefit of watching all students is important, but sort of the blaming and shaming becomes maybe something that can be we can take a look at.
That whole system can put us in an us and them way of thinking, so that all children are not welcomed. If we're not careful, that I don't know that has happened, but that it sets us up for that kind of thinking, and that's not fair to children.
Anything that you're particularly optimistic about? Let's try to end here on an optimistic note. What do you see as an opportunity or some optimism out there in the profession, in our business? Jean?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the thing that I'm optimistic about, and I'm sure you'd agree, is our kids. We have amazing kids, and I wish we had kids here you could really get to know who they are, because our kids are remarkable. And when we put our faith in them, we hold them to high expectations, give them the tools that they need, they do great things. And I'm so proud every time I go into schools and see the work that they're doing. I'm so proud of them. And that's the thing that gives me hope. We have a lot to do as the adults to make sure they get what they need, but if we do that, they're going to be just great.
Gene?
I think people are fighting the fight, and they're not quitting. And I see that every single day. And I think that's really true. I mean, that's really what we want to see, and that's teachers, administrators, and our students are not quitting. I will tell you, they just keep charging ahead, and they're tremendous.
Any other optimistic views out there right now?
Teachers are anxious to embrace this whole idea of 21st century skills, and they're also anxious to use some of the best lessons from the business community. A great book, Drive, by Daniel Pink, that talks about human motivation and getting beyond the dumbed down system of test scores. We're enthusiastic and we're hopeful that that's what's going to happen.
That's great. Well, I want to thank our panelists for being here. We've had to my right Mr. David Smith from Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, Dr. Gene Johnson, Shawnee Mission Superintendent, Ms. Sue Storms, State Board Member, Dr. Blake West, President of Kansas National Education Association, and Dr. Marlon Berry, Superintendent of Olathe Public Schools. And we'd like to thank our audience for listening in tonight, and hope that you'll be able to use the resources that are out there, either online, that may help you keep informed as we go forward on these important topics. Thank you.